Our next presenter, Fritz, is the CEO of Eden Labs, one of the corporate sponsors of MJBA. And Eden Labs specializes in the design, manufacture, research and development of a wide range of botanical extraction equipment. An innovator in the industry, Eden Labs collaborates with customers to design and fabricate the best systems for their specific needs. I have looked at your website, Fritz. I know got everything from the countertop model for the house to full-fledged industrial equipment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fritz.
Hi. First I'd like to clarify, I'm not the CEO of Eden Labs. That's AC Braddock, and she's back there. I did found the company though, and I was going to start by just telling part of that story. Eden Labs was founded in 1996. It was kind of a gradual start. My interest in extracting herbs actually began in the early 90s. At the time, I actually had a company called Eden Landscaping, so I was involved in the plant world that way. I had a tree farm, we did landscaping, we did tree trimming, and I was also writing articles for a little science and environmental journal. And I had done an article about a company called Shaman Pharmaceuticals, and their business model was to send researchers into the jungle, and if they found two tribes that used the same herb in the same way for a medicine, they took it back and analyzed it. That's kind of where my interest started, and I started extracting kind of the old school way, just putting herbs in a jar with alcohol and water and shaking it and putting it on the shelf. And it might have never gone any further than that, except that I wanted to extract an herb called kava, which is pretty difficult to extract, and it wouldn't extract just putting it in a jar and shaking it. So then I started thinking about extraction designs. And, you know, I did a little bit of cannabis at the time, but it extracted fine just putting it in a jar with alcohol, and sophisticated cannabis extractions weren't really in vogue in the early 90s. There wasn't all that much interested in cannabis extractions. So with the kava, I started looking at the extractors I could buy, and there wasn't much out there. There was really no such thing as a home extractor. In 1994, there was the Soxhlet unit, which chemists use, and there were the old ISO 2s that used to be sold in High Times back in the 70s. I don't know if anybody here remembers that, but I looked at those two designs, and I wasn't that crazy about them. I could see some good things and some things I didn't like, and so I came up with my own design and went to a scientific glassblower in Columbus, Ohio, where I was from, and I showed him what I wanted to do, and he said he wasn't really interested in helping me with that. So I handed him my card for Eden Landscaping, and he said, "I've got this branch over my driveway that I really need out of there." And I said, "That branch will be gone when you get home from work." And then after that, he started making our extractors. Can I get the next slide? So this ad over here basically represents the very beginning of Eden Labs. I had a friend down in Georgia that I met who sold, all kinds of obscure, strange herbs. And I told him about the extractor, and then he had me make him one. And he's like, "Dude, I can sell these if you can make them." I was like, Do you think there's a market for a home extractor? And he's like, "Well, we'll find out." So we started running that ad in High Times in like 1996. And I did talk to an attorney about, whether this, is a good idea, or whether I'm, are there legal liabilities. And he said the main thing was not to market directly for anything illegal. So then that became kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. So we put that at the top of the ad: "Attention, device not intended for illegal use." And we sold those in High Times until George Bush got elected. And then we decided probably not push our luck. And so we pulled the ad, But by that point, we had a good website and a reputation, and we had gotten involved with a lot of other herbs. The real craze in the late 90s was kava kava. I mean, the phone was ringing off the hook almost like it is now for cannabis. Everybody wanted to extract this kava kava. And playing around with the best way to do that, I started making CO2 units in 1997. The first one was real basic. It worked well, but it didn't recover the CO2. You just basically pumped it through and out the other end, and that made your extract. And so we started looking at a better way to do it. Let's see, can I get another slide? Okay, I'm going to back up and just talk about this. This was our original extraction process that we call cold finger that I had that glass blower make. So the way that works is you see the little basket with the slits hanging from that condenser. You basically put a coffee filter in there and some ground herb, and you put alcohol on the bottom and run cold water through the condenser on the top, and basically it's almost like a rain cycle. If you can picture the evaporation or the heat of the earth releasing those vapors, and the condenser would be kind of like the cool cloud where everything condenses. And so the alcohol just drips off those little dimple points on the end of the condenser and leaches through the herb and does a very complete extraction. And at the same time that the solvent's dripping, there's thick vapors in there that are also penetrating the herb as well. If the light's just right when it's running, it almost looks like there's kind of a jellyfish cloud hanging over the basket. You see these little tentacles going down in it, but the light has to be just right to see that. So that's where our business started, is making the cold finger units, and then we moved into CO2. Can I see the next? Okay, I'm gonna back up again. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is really interesting. Before marijuana was outlawed in 1938, it was also mostly consumed as an extract. It was sold, and with the forerunner to the modern drugstore, which was called an apothecary. And cannabis was generally sold as a tincture. And what's really interesting is a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies that we're all familiar with today, that's where they got their start, selling cannabis tinctures in these apothecaries. To the right, that bottle, that was the Upjohn Company. Park Davis right there. Eli Lilly, all the big names, that's where they got started. And these are some of their old antique bottles. These bottles are very valuable at this point and kind of hard to find. So, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so starting in 2003, we realized that the CO2 process, to be viable and profitable, you needed to have a closed-loop system that would recapture all the CO2 and continuously recirculate it through the product. Most companies were making just kind of a linear process where the CO2 was vented at the back end, and then there was a design out there where you actually had two pumps, one that did the extraction and one that recaptured the CO2 and pumped it back to a storage vessel. And I didn't think that was practical either. I wanted something that used one pump and recovered all the CO2. And the first thing we came up with was the one on the left that we call gas booster. So a gas booster pumps only vapor. And so that process was an easier way to test the theory and about recapturing the CO2, because as the CO2 is pumped through the extraction vessel on the left, it's condensed into either a supercritical fluid or a liquid. And then when it goes into the separator, it depressurizes and warms up where it drops out the oil. And then you have vapor just coming out of the vessel, which can go straight back to the gas booster pump and circle around. And that's how we did it for a few years. It actually seemed, pretty good. But the real challenge came, when the cannabis revolution started. What we realized is that, first of all, cannabis isn't really all that soluble in CO2. It's a longer process. So then we realized that the gas booster design was just too slow. And then the other problem with cannabis was tiny bits of oil always stayed entrained in those vapors and ended up going back through the pump and scoring the inside of it. And so we started realizing that the gas booster pumps, they got damaged very quickly and had to be rebuilt all the time. And so starting in 2012, we took it to the next level that we call high flow, and that's where we're pumping liquid. So obviously when you're pumping CO2 in a liquid form, you can move a lot more CO2. The trick was to get the vapor from the separator turned back into liquid and feeding that pump efficiently. Took a little trial and error, but we got it all figured out, and that's what we're selling now, and they've been very well received. I got to say, a couple years ago it was a little embarrassing, but everybody that was buying these booster designs, their pumps were having problems pretty quickly. They were clogging valves. There were compressor problems. So the phone would ring, and I'd see a customer's number come up, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, what is it? Oh, the pump's broken. The valve's clogged," something like that. But now most of the calls we're getting is people that's basically bragging that they got a 15% yield, or they got a 20% yield, or they paid for their unit in only a couple weeks. Those are the kind of calls we're getting now. And it happened at just the right time, because we brought out that high flow design right about the time 502 passed. So the timing was really good. The booster designs are still out there. There's probably 5 different companies making them, and just keep in mind that those booster pumps break quickly. Can I get the next slide? These are just some more pictures of the cold fingers. That's a more sophisticated version on the left that works under vacuum, which isn't really necessary for cannabis. Generally you want some heat on it, so it decarboxylates the product and turns it into THC, but a lot of other herbs we work with are highly temperature sensitive, so you want to do your distillation at low temperature, which you can do when you put it under vacuum. Next slide. So on the left here is just one of our modern high flow units. On the right is one of our big distillers. Up until the cannabis thing started a few years ago, distillers were our main business. We make them, we make the little glass ones, and then for stainless steel, we go 25, 100, and 500 gallon. Our distillers have a multiple range of uses. They do like 3 different kinds of extractions, several different kinds of distillations. Particularly well suited for making gins, because technically a gin is a kind of an herbal infused alcohol where you distill off the alcohol and get a clear product that has an herbal flavor to it with the volatiles. In the middle is just some CO2 extracts. The one on the bottom would be kind of the early part of the run where it comes out like a nice fluffy yellow color. The stuff on the top is usually later in the run. It gets a little thicker and crunchier. Next slide. I'm just going to skip over that one too. So CO2, it's mostly in the news for causing the climate to change. So basically there's a lot of carbon locked up in the ground. When it's brought up and burned as fuel in any kind of way, then it's going in the atmosphere and causing the planet to warm. Which brings up the subject of sustainable CO2 for these extractors, for those who are concerned about that kind of thing. Some of the CO2 we're using comes out of the distillation plants where they're making alcohol. You could call that a sustainable CO2 because it came from a plant, so it came from carbon that was already in our atmosphere, not underground. Other CO2 comes from other industrial processes, mostly things having to do with petroleum products, so that would be, I guess, unsustainable CO2. CO2 is also used in fire extinguishers, a lot of other industrial processes, and one of the most common uses is just pushing beer into mugs at bars. A lot of people are familiar with that. Next slide. Let's just go on past that one too. Here's some other cannabis extracts. Most of those are all CO2. The one at the bottom is a butane shatter. I think everybody, you know, is fairly, most of the people in this room probably know that usually to get a hardened oil, it's the easiest way to do it is with a hydrocarbon like butane and propane. We do make closed loop butane and propane extractors, and the butane thing obviously is a bit of a problem for the industry. People are blowing up houses. There's a lot of dirty butane out there it's got benzenes and heavy metals and lubricant oils in it. So it's important when you're working with those gases to get you know, the pure gases that are instrument grade and, you know, refined to, you know, over 99.9%. It's important to have a closed loop system that recollects all those gases. And so we, you know, we really don't take sides on this. We make equipment that does all the different processes. And butane and propane are on the FDA generally regarded as safe solvents. They're, you know, they're considered fine for any kind of extraction that are out there. And there's lots of other things, you know, consumable products extracted with butane. Down in Mexico, there's a giant factory that uses butane to extract astaxanthin, which is you know, a nutraceutical from algae. So these hydrocarbons are fine. It just has to be done in a professional manner. And you know, I am concerned that butane is sort of the Achilles heel of our industry. It's you know, it was just on the news the other night. 2 different people in one day blew up houses. So somehow this industry needs to deal with the butane issue. I'm not sure how the best way to go about that is, but it is a problem. Next slide. Okay, so on the left here is a picture of what I think is just the nicest batch of CO2 oil that was ever made. It was Pam Haley here in the front row. It was her stuff. It was this was made last summer. It came out, it had a beautiful marbled look to it. It was extremely fragrant, and I've never seen anything as pretty as that yet, but it was entered in the Concentrates Cup, and for some reason it didn't win. I don't know why. I thought it was the best one. Eden Labs customers pretty much swept that event, but nevertheless, Pam should have won with that extract right there. I'm setting the record straight here. Off to the right is an ultra-refined CO2 oil. There is a kind of a movement towards really clarified oils. People like that. And we do have a process for taking the CO2 oil all the way to where it, you know, it's pretty flowable and syrupy and pretty clear. And the process is not that different from, you know, when you go to the grocery store and you see all those clear vegetable oils, they've all been degummed and de-waxed and carbon filtered, and essentially our process is very similar. Next slide. So I've been doing these events in other states that haven't legalized yet, but are on the verge of legalizing. I've been traveling a little bit with this Cannabis Career Institute group. So when I'm in a place like Cincinnati or Detroit, where people have never really seen what all of you are familiar with at this point, is all the things you can do with cannabis to make interesting retail products, like the vape pens, cookies, pops, salves. So everybody here knows about that, but you know, in Detroit and Cincinnati and those kind of places, everybody's just blown away when they see all the possibilities. Although, you know, the word's spreading fast, and pretty soon everybody will know about everything you can do with cannabis. Next slide, please. These jars here was just an experiment we did where we took the same cannabis and we did CO2 extraction and then a cold finger ethanol extraction. So the one that's more orange on the left was a CO2 extraction. This one over here to the right was done with our cold finger process, just very lightly carbon filtered. It still has a tiny bit of green in it, but most of it's out. The CO2 extract came out at like 69% THC, and the ethanol extract was like 65. So the CO2 was slightly better, but not dramatic. Next slide. This is an extractor we have in Seattle that we sold a while back. It's the old gas booster design. So you see the extractor vessel on the left and the two separators, and the gas just comes out of there and goes straight back to the pump. And you know, the booster units also require extremely large compressors. That's a 20-horse compressor he's using on that. Our new high flow design will extract twice as fast as that unit and use a 5-horsepower compressor. Next slide. So I just added this drawing to the exhibit because Washington's going to allow industrial hemp production, is my understanding, and last week a new farm bill passed, one of the few pieces of legislation to get through the House and Senate in a long time. And in there's a provision where I think up to 8 states will be able to do industrial hemp production. So there may be a need for very large-scale extractors. And generally, when people are doing large hemp extractions, they're usually using ethanol to do it efficiently and inexpensively. The way this unit would work, your hemp would be in the large vessel that's at a 45-degree angle. Solvent would pump from the bottom up. It would pass through that sight glass to where you could see the color change and know when your process is done. And then it would pump straight from there into the distiller, which is modified to be a falling film evaporator and strip that ethanol out quickly. And then the ethanol is recollected in the vessel next to it. I was just told the other day that right now CBD, pure CBD, is selling for $10 a milligram, which is probably 10 times what THC is going for, which I just found amusing because, when I was a kid growing up in Ohio, we could drive over to Illinois and Nebraska and there was wild hemp everywhere. And, we tried smoking it, it didn't really do anything, but then we knew some guys who were taking that and isomerizing the CBD back into THC. And now the CBD is worth 10 times as much, so things change. With a unit like this, everybody's heard about all the different things you can do with hemp. There's rope and building materials and the hemp seed oils. Another thing you could do is actually make fuel ethanol out of it, doing a supercritical water process. So in something like that, after you flushed whatever solvent through this to extract the CBD, at that point you could pump water up to like 4,500 psi and 700 degrees, and it would take all that hemp and just immediately break it down into glucose, which could then be fermented and distilled and make alcohol out of it. So anyway, just wanted to cover some of those possibilities with our new hemp crops that'll be coming soon. So everybody here in Washington's in a unique position to capitalize on that market as well, since we know the business better than everybody else, and we're one of the first states that's going to allow hemp production. Next slide. This is just a close-up of our new closure system we call the FAC closure. When we were redesigning the system the last half of 2012, in the past we had been using just a standard flange, a multi-bolt flange, that which is very common, ANSI rated flange. But the thing I didn't like about them is where they close, there's like a 1/4 inch gap between the top flange and the bottom flange, and there's an O-ring in between. If that O-ring breaks, that CO2 can come out at very high pressures and represent potential danger. And so we started looking for a better way to do the closure, a safer closure, and a closure that was fast and easy to open. And this is what we came up with. We call the FAC. It basically just opens and closes like a mason jar. You drop the cap straight down, drop that ring on, and it spins down and closes up the system. You can see where the hands are. The O-ring is now buried down inside the vessel, and that ring goes over it. So if the O-ring snaps while it's under pressure, the CO2 will just merely seep out it won't come out, you know, at a dangerous force that could, you know, hit you in the eyes or something like that. And it's, you know, it's much easier to open and close. So, you know, we're very happy about that. Next slide. So I was talking about the advantages of our new design over the gas booster design. We did put a lot of those gas booster designs on the market up until late 2012, and of course we got lots of competitors that are still doing that design. So we wanted to come up with a way for people to turn their booster design into a high flow unit so that they could extract faster and have less maintenance problems. So we came up with, we call it a high flow retrofit. So you can buy one of these, roll it up to one of our old units or one of our competitors' units with about 2 hours of plumbing changes. Now your extractor can go two to three times as fast, and you're not going to have a pump breaking every 6 weeks. Next slide. So this is kind of just a general picture of a lot of the distillers we make. On the lower left is one of the little glass cold fingers where we started. Upper left is kind of our smallest stainless steel unit. It'll hold about 5 or 6 pounds of cannabis and extract that in a day or two. That's one of our larger 25-gallon units in the middle. And off to the right, this distiller was made for an industrial process where they were recovering naphtha from some kind of something having to do with semiconductor making. And so it's just essentially a vacuum still where on the left your dirty naphtha goes in and you heat and pull vacuum and the naphtha comes through and condenses and drops into the vessel on the right. And just an example of other things Eden Labs does. We've also done a lot of research with the flavoring industry, other industrial processes like separating plasticizers from plastic, and I don't know, other things I can't think of at this moment. Right, the next slide. So this is an example of what we've done with the flavoring industry. On the left is the largest CO2 unit we've ever made. It's a 120-liter system. It's at a flavoring company down in Los Angeles, and it's extracting vanilla beans. The vanilla beans is kind of weird. To legally call vanilla extract a vanilla extract, the FDA requires that you just take whole beans and soak them in alcohol with no heat and then pour that off. So that's a really inefficient extraction process, but that's how you have to do it to call it vanilla extract. Anything else has to be called, a vanilla flavoring. So what we figured out is we can take that stuff after they've made the vanilla extract, we can take that and put it in the CO2 unit and get like twice as much vanilla extract as you got with the first go around. You just can't call it vanilla extract, but the CO2 extracted vanilla is actually superior for any time you want to mix vanilla with any kind of dairy product like vanilla ice cream or yogurt or anything like that. The CO2 extract basically goes in the solution in dairy much better. Okay, so next. Alright, so this is our crew. We have Eden Labs is based down in South Park on Cloverdale. We have a little factory there where we're making CO2 units. If you told me when I was in college that I would own a factory someday, I would have laughed. And then if you told me what that factory was doing, then I would have really laughed and said, oh, okay, I guess it makes sense. Anybody who would like to see, just make an appointment and come down to 309 South Cloverdale, you get a D10, and you can see CO2 units being made. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.